Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Forethought, a podcast series dedicated to raising awareness about mental health and well-being through lived experience stories. So today I'm joined by Toomey, a globally recognized author, speaker, and thought leader in workplace wellness. John, how are you doing today?
I'm really well, Joel. Really well. How are you going?
Good. Just gearing up for wedding season. I think the next 3 weekends we've got weddings around and about, so just frantically organizing for that. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. And I know when we caught up earlier this week, we sort of settled on a topic that was something around getting yourself grounded as a good human being in this world that's gone a little bit crazy, which I'm excited to kind of dive in a little bit deeper with you. But to start off with, would you be able to give people who are listening a bit of a background on yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Oh, golly, yeah. I'll try to cram 63 years in 2 minutes. Yeah, so look, I was born and partially raised in the Darling Downs in Queensland until my folks decided to buy a pub in Collingwood. And I've got 8 siblings, and so they wanted something where they could house all of us and earn enough money to put us through Catholic schools. So that was the move to Collingwood. My dad was a Victorian anyway, and my mum was a Queenslander. So growing up in a pub between the age of 10 and 17 was a real experience and an eye-opener. And people often say, how did you become a speaker? And I say, well, growing up in Collingwood in the 70s, you either had to be able to fight or run fast or talk. And I couldn't fight and I wasn't very quick. So talking it was. But I did my final 3 years of school at Marcelin College, a Morris Brothers school in Bulleen in Melbourne, and it sort of just knocked enough of the bogan out of me for me to be able to survive, in this world. But I studied physical education, which was a last-minute decision and probably the best decision of my life. I was such an athlete and keen on all forms of sport. Got into surf lifesaving, worked as a professional lifeguard for 4 seasons, worked in health clubs, upmarket health clubs, looking after politicians and movie stars and rock stars and all that sort of thing, and even driving Barry Humphrey's car for him.
Oh, wow.
Big Rolls Royce, But, then sort of I kept following my nose because I mean, if you said to me, what's your superpower? It's curiosity. And so I just kept following and looking, and I found myself teaching all the time and talking to groups and writing courses and developing educational content. And I started an IT company in the mid-1980s and carried that through until the mid-90s, where we became the biggest supplier of IT systems to the fitness and recreation industry in Australasia.
Wow.
But yeah, it was a tough gig because we were selling computers to people that didn't understand computers and were frightened of computers. So that was a real journey and taught me a lot of patience and and it helped with my communication skills. It really, really did, because you have to communicate in a way that people can understand. And all the while, I also worked in the AFL in high performance roles. I served 7 different clubs in high performance roles over the years. And then started getting back into course production in the late 90s. I developed a Pilates teacher trainer course for the fitness industry. I wrote Australia's first accredited wellness leadership course, which was great. And then once I finished in footy at the end of 99, I moved to the Mornington Peninsula with my then partner, who became my second wife. And I started going back into full-time speaking and focusing on workplace wellbeing. But I'd been drifting in and out of workplace wellbeing since 1984. So currently now doing a lot of work in this area, producing a lot of content, and currently sitting as global chairperson of the Workplace Wellbeing Initiative at the Global Wellness Institute in Miami. So, and also lectured at universities along the way too, somewhere. Yeah, so that was all cool.
Yeah, no, that's a fascinating kind of roller coaster career tangent there, but it kind of all makes sense. Like going through and progressively, like doing IT support in the 80s and 90s would have been very interesting. I completely understand how that built your patience.
It was amazing. I got a phone call at 10:30 one night from an Eastern Suburbs recreation centre in Melbourne, and I said, what do you need? And she said, well, the power's gone out in the whole building. And I said, why are you calling me? And she said, I think the computer did it.
That's so funny. Oh gosh. Yeah, I guess it's a bit different to now IT support. Where it's like, have you tried turning it off and on again? I imagine that was still probably one of the top tips back then as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I went to train one gentleman on his newly bought system because we developed all the software, and I switched the computer on. He goes, what did you do then?
So good. I think this is kind of like a good segue into getting into the first topic, and we sort of chatted about it the other day, but in your opinion, why do you think there's such an epidemic of mental health challenges these days, given kind of what you've seen over the past 40, 50 years?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Well, see, human beings, like most biological creatures, we don't evolve quickly. It takes time for us to adapt, and through epigenetic learning, sort of implant new learnings in our genetics so that we can evolve. And probably you could argue that over the last 50 years, even the last 40 years, the rate of change has been meteoric. It's been extraordinary. Like, I bought my first computer, an IBM PC, in 1985, and it cost me $12,000.
Whoa.
I bought a house on the edge of Brighton in Melbourne, which is one of Melbourne's most expensive suburbs, the same year for $59,000. So, nobody predicted what this computer industry was going to do. We had no clue. We thought the computers were going to take people's jobs, but in actual fact, they brought industries with them. Like, look at the size of the industries that came with computers. So that part was extraordinary. There wasn't a single science fiction writer on the planet that predicted the internet. But then the internet gave rise to something that was not imaginable. You look at companies like Facebook and Google. There is no physical property in those companies. They're completely digital assets made out of zeros and ones. So that sort of rapid change has been just incredible, and we haven't had an opportunity to adjust to it yet. If you think about it, the iPhone came out just 15 years ago. So up until 15 years ago, there was no definition for the word app, which is an abbreviation, by the way, of software application. But look at how it's affecting our lives now. Tens of thousands of apps, and we've all got heaps of apps on our phones that we don't even use. So that sort of change really sort of can sort of sideswipe life and things dominate us. But if we go back for a moment, use our imagination to go back 150 years, saying, think about what life was like back then. When you stepped out of your house in the morning, survival issues demanded your attention. So your attention went out into the world, and you're monitoring things like the integrity of the walls of your house, the roof of your house, but not just yours, your neighbours, your water supply, your vegetables that you're growing, your fruit trees, your animals, your fences. Can we extend our house and make it more robust so we can put a fire on the inside? Just issues, and managing sewage. And if somebody sneezed, that was a sign they might die, So all these things demanded our attention because we had so much that we had to take care of, including other people. But fast forward to today, everyone's safe. I know there's refugees on the planet, but around our suburbs, everyone's pretty safe. We've got somewhere safe to sleep. We've got all the food we need. We're okay. And a question I ask people is, when was the last time you arrived home and slipped your key in the front door and had an anxious thought about the welfare of one of your neighbours? Probably never, because everyone's okay. So then I ask, what is it that's demanding your attention? And the answer is, unless you're at work focused on a task or locked onto something on television, then your attention's wandering. And there's really smart people whose job it is to seduce your attention we call them marketing professionals. And they want to seduce your attention. Now, that's okay. That's their job. But we've lost that ability to deliberately control our attention. And if it's not directed at something that we want it to be directed at, it wavers around and it often comes back here. To the point where we end up with too much attention on ourselves. Now, what does that look like? Well, have you ever gotten in your car and driven, say, for 40 minutes across town and arrived at the destination with no recollection of the trip?
Yep.
Because all the way you had enough attention out to stop you crashing, and the rest of it was probably ruminating over something in your mind, something that happened yesterday, some concerns about money, or insecurities with your relationship, or a relationship, could be romantic, could be work, or a customer, or whatever. And your mind is just going all the time because your attention's not going out of the world, it's going back into your mind. And so what we're finding now is that because people are spending so much time in their mind, they're ruminating, they're becoming self-obsessed, and the end result of those two things is either depression or anxiety.
Yeah.
Because we've lost that capacity to live our life with our attention out in the world. And the magic is, when you have got your attention out in the world and you learn how to do it really well, your mind goes quiet. You don't spend all this time thinking. And your mind becomes a tool again that you use when you need to use it, and it's not running the show.
Yeah.
So that's my explanation as to why we've got so much. And then you can add into that all the stuff around ego and approval seeking and avoiding disapproval and not managing our money very well because we're making purchases that are related to our ego or approval seeking or those sorts of stuff, instead of being very deliberate in the way we manage our lives.
Yeah, that's super interesting about the community aspect of it, and like even just reflecting on my neighbors. Like, I think the only time I've really spoken to my neighbors in the past few months is when I accidentally had an Amazon package delivered to our house instead of theirs, and I took it over to them, and that was it. So it's, I guess, quite different to even when thinking back when, you know, I was young and, you know, your community was your neighbors. Like, we used to play in the street with the kids on our street, play basketball out the front of the house, like all of that kind of thing. Like, I guess there's been a pivot away from that, I guess, to speaking with people via apps or on just texting or whatever, rather than actually going out and doing it.
Yeah, and the kids are competing with each other on electronic games over the internet, you know, instead of playing basketball out in the street. And it's just interesting. And I'm not saying it's wrong. Why would I have some sort of right to say that's wrong? But, you know what I mean? It's just that it's changed, and there's change brings consequences, and you know, we've got to look at those and explore them and not just be at the effect of them.
Yeah, I think I've had to remove social media apps off my phone because I noticed, well, I call it doom scrolling, but I sort of caught myself in this loop of just scrolling through stuff. It could even just be the news or whatever while I was doing something else, like watching TV. I'm not really focusing on either one of those two things. So I think I guess in your opinion, you know, like, what are some strategies, I guess, if you do notice yourself getting into this trend of maybe too much smartphone use or too much app use or anything like that? Like, what are some things people can do to kind of recognize that and then maybe avoid some of those negative consequences that might start to develop?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that if we find ourselves constantly diving onto Facebook to check things, there's some level of drama in that. You know, wanting to see what other people are doing, how other people responded to what we've said or posted, or those sorts of things. And so I think in a lot of that stuff, there's stuff going in there about approval and disapproval, wanting other people to approve of us or not wanting to be disapproved of, or us disapproving of others, you know, that sort of thing. And that's a murky game to play, you know, and it's very seductive though. And, you know, because everybody, you know, wants to be right. But, you know, there's an old saying that says, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? So really, I would say that if you know a person who's a smoker and they can't give up smoking, and you're critical of them for that, for being so weak, well, take on a task like that yourself. Get off social media.
Yeah.
break that addiction yourself. You know, Johann Hari wrote a brilliant book called Chasing the Scream, and it was his deep dive into the war on drugs. He went on this incredible journey for years and years and years, really exploring where the drug war came from and what it really looks like. And he met a fellow by the name of Gabor Mate in Vancouver, and Mate is a Hungarian Jewish Holocaust survivor. And he's been doing incredible work with addicts. And after spending time with Mate, Johann Hari came back and added a new chapter to the book and released a second edition. And the chapter is called "The Opposite of Addiction is Connection." And, you know, one of the things we probably all love more than anything is sitting down with a friend and having a conversation. That's connection. But it's even deeper connection if we can drop all of our judgments and our criticisms and just meet our friend where they're at.
Yeah.
And if you can learn how to live your life that way, then you'll comfortably connect with strangers, and you'll actually have really interesting connections with strangers and perhaps make more friends. But when we're stuck looking at apps and those sorts of things, we're not present in the world. We might as well be out in deep space somewhere. And so we're not noticing these opportunities to connect. So my question to people is, can you break the addiction? Now, I've got social media. I've got Instagram, I've got Facebook, mostly because I use Messenger. I rarely use Facebook itself, and I use LinkedIn. But I'm not addicted to them. You know, I can put them down. I can walk away from them for days. It's fine, but I have had periods in my life where I started to get too interested in them and got hooked in by them, but I realized it wasn't a good thing. But we've got to make some deliberate choices and not be at the effect of it, because the world that is inside social media is not a real world.
Yeah.
You know, and if we think it is, then we've got some work to do.
Yeah, I think there's two interesting points there. The first is, you know, just getting in a habit of turning off notifications for those social media apps, because I've done that recently. I had to do it with Uber because I kept getting like Uber Eats things targeted at me. They know you better than you know yourself. So it's always at the moment where they're like, you're likely to be hungry. Here, order a pizza for $20. I'm like, that seems like a pretty good deal. The second thing is, particularly when it comes to asking your mates, like, are you okay? We recently had Are You Okay Day. I think the difference between asking that in person or via text or messenger, there's such a difference there, because when you get that question over a message, you can just be like, yeah, I'm fine, and text it off, and there's no emotional connection. But if you ask that to someone in person, coming back to your point, like, that's obviously a much better strategy to do, right? Because you're face to face with someone, you can read cues. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because October, there's a wonderful group that I support called the Male Hug, and it's about men's mental health. And October is Talktober. And they're basically saying to people, it's time to talk, you know, and talking by text is not talking. And one of the most powerful things you can do with your mates is say, let's go for a walk. Because men talk best when they're side by side, not face to face.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I learned that as a kid in the pub, because I would see these guys standing there side by side with their backs to the bar, looking out the window, having a conversation. You know, and every now and then they would look at each other, but they weren't compelled to look at each other. And that's how men roll, you know. So you're dead right. That in-person thing is so cool. But yeah, the amazing thing is you can be texting your mate and doing a whole lot of texting, and that's fine. Or you can go and meet him somewhere, and you can kill two birds with one stone, because you can have the conversation and go for a walk at the same time. And if you go for a walk somewhere nice, also taking a bit of Mother Nature.
Yeah.
So, but those sorts of things don't happen, I think, because phones have supported us to become lazy. Because we go, it takes effort to get in the car and drive to my mate's place, you know. Well, we've got to get over that and take those steps.
Yeah, I guess I live in Sydney, so Sydney traffic is a bit prohibitive, but for people who live in normally built cities, that can probably be a bit better thing. How do you think, so if we take this and then put it into the context of a workplace, particularly when it comes to, say, feedback or anxiety around getting an email or a text from your boss or something like that, and misinterpreting that text, because obviously messages are fairly one-dimensional. Like, exclamation mark or full stop, does that mean I'm in trouble? Like that kind of thing. Do you think there's been a bit of a negative change in the workplace towards people avoiding face-to-face conversations that might be difficult?
Well, I think Frank Zappa had a great quote. He said, "The thing that is missing with computers is the eyebrows." And it's so important to be careful with your written word when you're covering sensitive topics with employees, but you've got to be clear as well. And sometimes when you're being clear, it can be read the wrong way. And like I remember being involved in groups where we were doing really good work and it required an enormous amount of integrity. And you get a message from the leader of the group by text that was, that was strong about something that I needed to look at from what happened the day before. And sometimes the first read on that text, I felt like I was being yelled at. And it was really uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
And then from that place, I couldn't respond to the email because you're in react. And when you're in react, you're no good to anybody. It's like playing football. If you can get the opposition reacting to you, they're gone. Any sport, you get the opposition in react, you've got them, So what I say to people is when you get those emails and you read them and you feel a stress response to the email, walk away from it. Walk away from it and come back and read it again. You might need to read it 10 times till you finally get your reactivity switched off so you can actually see what the email is really saying.
Yep.
Then you can respond to it. And if you don't understand it, well, then it takes courage to take a deep breath and go in to the boss and go, "Hey, boss, I'm not clear on this. Help me with it, because obviously it's something we need to move through here." And be open about it. Like being defensive shuts down all of our resources. We lose connection to our intuition, and then all we've got is this mad, frantic mind that doesn't want to get into trouble. And that's got old stuff in it from school. But if we can just recognize that's just old stuff, that part of you that is the mind, Joel, how do you refer to it?
I don't know, me? Like myself?
Do you call it me or do you call it my mind?
I've made up my mind, I guess would be. So yeah, my mind. What is my mind? I don't know.
Exactly. So and this is the really cool thing. I don't know whether you've ever read any of the work from Harry Palmer. Harry Palmer's got this stuff nailed. He's an extraordinary man. And he said, you're not your mind. Your mind is just a tool that you use in your life, but it's not who you are, right? But he said what happens is at some point, you and your mind trade off on who's going to run your life. And once the mind is in charge, it's a dictator that's not going to release power very easily,
Yeah.
But your mind is something you create to navigate through life, but it's not you. And that's the part that most people miss. And so they live a reactive life. And that's no fun.
I think, that's interesting because you can say the same thing, whether it be at work or with your partner at home or with a friend, is like if you get into an argument about something, it does take a lot of, I guess, control over yourself to maybe pause it and like take 5 minutes, maybe go away, have a few deep breaths, go for a walk with the dog or whatever, and then come back to understand what the other person is thinking. So kind of, I guess what you're saying is it does apply, is applicable. Same on the sporting field. You could just walk away from that guy sledging you and just take 5, come back, and you probably piss him off more if you don't actually respond and you're just like, righto, whatever, because then he's going to react. So it's just a competition to see who can react first.
Well, yeah, exactly. And it's like when I became a single dad for a few years when my son was 6, and I thought about it and I thought, wow, I've got to become a brilliant parent, not just a good parent. So I went to some workshop classes with this amazing woman, Caroline McLean, and she was blind, but she was just a genius at managing kids. And she gave me a piece of advice that I've never let go of, and it's carried me through life, not just with my kids, but with everybody. Strike when the iron is cold.
I like that.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, single dad, that would have been probably the first time you'd ever heard of anything like that as well. And pretty much what changed, I guess, your perspective on a lot of things, I imagine, after that.
Well, it's no good engaging a person when they're angry or when you're angry,
Mm.
because all you get is reactivity and a lot of ego in there, So the trick is to wait till everybody's cooled down. And like with my son, if he had some really bad behavior, maybe he had too much sugar and he was reactive and I just didn't engage it. I just let it go. And then later on, I would sit down next to him and go, "Hey, mate, can we have a chat about what happened earlier?" And he'd go, "Yeah, Dad," and we'd have a really good talk about it. And,
That's
and
awesome.
we could move some things forward.
That's
But
really awesome.
because when the kids are in that state, your only tool is domination.
Mm.
And that doesn't teach them anything good. That just teaches them to dominate later in life, So, yeah.
When it comes to the mind, I guess, so like basically you're saying treat the mind like a muscle, and you always should be kind of working on trying, and maybe it's meditation or yoga or whatever activity that you do to help you kind of build this mind or mental resilience, I guess. Like what can people do to kind of build that up, and then I guess following into that, like to, I guess, prevent mental health challenges that they might face? Are the two linked?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And look, there's a really beautiful way to do this, and it's all about incorporating things into your life that get your attention out into the world. Okay. So let's just say, for example, that you walk into a coffee shop and you order a coffee, takeaway coffee, and it gets served to you and you pay. And as you're walking out, you take a sip of the coffee and you realize that it's a really good cup of coffee. You ever had that experience?
Yeah.
So what would happen if you stopped, went back inside, got the barista's attention and said, "Thank you so much. You've made me an amazing cup of coffee. You've started my day out for me. You're a godsend. Thank you. Thank you." And you walk out. How does the barista feel?
Oh, I used to be that barista for like 6 years. And when someone actually told you made them a good coffee, that made your day.
Yeah. And what were the next coffees like? Say the next 100 coffees like after that compliment?
Oh, like you're almost like a friend with that person. It kind of broke down this barrier, and you all of a sudden put more attention into learning their name, like what they did on the weekend, and actually opening up like that because you liked them.
Exactly. So their compliment to you opened a connection.
Mm.
But what's more, immediately after that, the next 100 coffees you made for other people were probably, because you would have been in the zone, right? So
Yeah.
that person's compliment touched you and probably 100 other people. But how did that person feel about themselves as they walked out of the coffee shop?
Probably pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You see, and probably our superpower that we have that helps us get our attention out in the world is our kindness.
Mm.
And we use our kindness to acknowledge people who are doing good work, like the barista. But like if you're stuck in a position in a company, whatever, and what would happen if you just wrote a card or even did it verbally, it doesn't matter, to your boss to say, "I just want to acknowledge you for the pressure that you're under and how amazing you are at doing your job, and thank you for your support and your leadership."
Mm. Yeah, it's probably the first time they've heard that in a while, so it probably would be like, oh.
Well, yeah. And I was doing a seminar for a room full of wharfies. And I was talking to them about acknowledging others for doing good work. And one of them, he's put his hand up and he said, "Yeah, what about management? Nobody ever acknowledges me for, my work. I've never been acknowledged." And the whole room sort of did a harumph. And I thought, oh my God, I've tossed him up a full toss and he's hit it straight up in the air for me, And and I just let it sit there for about 10 seconds. And I said, "And when was the last time you contacted one of your bosses to tell them you think they're doing a good job?" And the whole room got it.
Yeah.
Just like that. They all went, "Oh, shit. I got to stop expecting to receive it. I've got to give it.
Mm.
But see, that's what happens when you become self-absorbed. You start expecting other people to give you stuff. That you're never going to find happiness doing that. What we've got to do is step out into the world, and every opportunity we get is to be nice to another human being and do it with genuineness. Like, yeah, sometimes you walk past people and they're so beautifully dressed and you think, wow, you know, and like I'll often say to a woman, you know, I might just walk past in the supermarket and I say, I can't believe how elegantly you dress. That's beautiful. That's all. I haven't got any sort of intention other than that, just to compliment them. Or if I see her, I got in a lift one day and there was this big man in the lift and the lift was full and it was busy. And this big Middle Eastern man, I found out later on he's Persian, and the suit he was wearing was beyond belief. And I just, in front of all these people, I said, sir, I just have to say to you, that is one of the most beautiful suits I've ever seen.
Yeah, right.
And it just looks amazing on you. And he smiled and he said, oh, thank you. I've got a really good tailor. And he started to tell us all about his tailor. And all the people in the lift were smiling and they were curious. And that all happens because one person decides to be a nice human being and give a compliment.
Mm. It's quite interesting. So I guess the same psychology of that is where bad reviews versus good reviews on a restaurant, for example. People who have had a good experience will go home and relax and watch TV, and that's kind of the end of it. Where if you have the bad experience, you're more inclined to go and leave a bad review on there.
Yeah, and you see, I'm so glad you brought that up, because some of the best experiences of my life have been where I've gone to a shop, for example, you know, and there's this amazing shop in Melbourne called Terra Madre, where everything inside that shop, it's like a rabbit warren, it's huge, because they took over several shop fronts, you know.
Yeah.
And everything in there is organic or biodynamic. It's amazing. And it's cheaper than a supermarket. Like, it's incredible.
Wow.
It's the most amazing shop. And it is humming 24/7. Well, it's not 24 hours, but it's open a lot. And they've got lots of checkouts. It's just humming. And the first time I went in there, I was in awe of the place. I was gobsmacked. So I went home and I went to their webpage and I went to the contact link and I wrote a very long email to the person that would read that email. And I said, I just want to acknowledge you first for your courage, because there was no model to follow for a shop like that in Melbourne before you opened it. And you must have had to have signed a lease that probably had the potential to take your house off you, because you got to put personal guarantees down. And I said, so there must have been in the first 12 months many sleepless nights and lots of distress. I said, but I just want to acknowledge you for all of that and your courage, because what you've created is something that is so powerful and so beautiful and so important to the community. And like, I really explained out what I meant by all that. And I forgot about it. You know, I just walked away and I felt really good that I acknowledged them. And about 3 days later, I got this email. I thought, I don't know that email address. And I looked at it and I got this long essay. And the person wrote back to tell me their story.
Wow, that's cool.
I cried while I read it. It was amazing. And I've still got it to this day.
Yeah.
And so I got an unexpected gift back. So one of the things that we can do, if you feel a bit shy about going up to people, you can always jump on their webpage and tell them why you think they're great.
And so I guess by being kind, I guess the link between that and obviously like mental health. So what you're kind of saying is, like, if you put it out into the universe, you'll receive it, and then it kind of works to build, I guess, yourself up and your mind and all of that kind of thing. That's how they're kind of linked.
Well, yeah, but even if you don't receive it, I don't think that will matter. You will, but even if you don't, because what happens is every time you act in that way from a genuine place, you lift up your self-acceptance. You start to like who you're becoming. And when you go to bed at night, you're not criticizing yourself for what you did today. You actually like yourself. And so the more that you do those things, the more you just feel content with who you are, because you know you're a good person.
Yeah. I think it's quite funny. Like, because I've worked in hospitality, I'll always thank, you know, if you go out to a restaurant, you always say thank you and stuff like that. But when you go back and you think about like first dates you've been on, if I'm on a first date with a girl and she thanks the restaurant people first, you're automatically like, whoa, like that's awesome. And you sort of like really like that person a lot more. And they didn't even do anything to you. They just did something to someone else. You're like, oh, okay, I can see that kind of person that you are. That's really interesting. It's the same, I guess, when you're looking at friends. Like, you know, if you've got a friend that will say, thanks for the beer when you're at a bar or whatever, and just treats other people nicely, it's a good reflection of themselves. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And it's really, we've got to stop waiting for the world to make us happy or shift us out of our depression. We've got to step out and work on making the world happy. You know, a good friend of mine, Di Westaway, who's the founder of Coast Trek, which a lot of your listeners will know of Coast Trek. She was raising money for the Fred Hollows Foundation for a long time. And she was telling me that she asked Fred what the purpose of life was. And his response was to help each other. Simple as that, you know. Yeah. And that's how she lives her life. And she's a very happy person. Because it doesn't take much to help another person and give a little bit of ourselves, give our goodness into the world, you know. And you notice how I do that? I always put my hand here, because that stuff comes from our heart. That's not our mind. And you start living more in your heart. And the more we live in our heart, the less we live in our mind.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I know last time we caught up as well, you mentioned like a personal moral compass. So it'd be quite interesting to get your thoughts on, you know, how that moral compass plays a role in a positive, I guess, mental state.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a cool question, because I think moral compass or moral code is something that's been devalued. And you know, you can't just wake up one day and say, okay, I've got a good, strong moral code. It's a journey. It's like fitness. There's a lot of suffering involved, because you're going to make a lot of mistakes. We're going to feel stupid sometimes. We're going to open our mouths and say something really inappropriate at times. But all the while, all those moments of feeling stupid, feeling humiliated, we're learning deep lessons. And we eventually arrive at a point where we can feel in any moment what is the right thing to do and what's not the right thing to do. And that should be unshakable. And every time we feel what's the right thing to do and we back away from it from fear, we degrade ourselves a little bit. And we've got some cleaning up to do. You know, we've got to make up for that to maintain our moral compass. And I had a good friend who sort of went off the rails a bit and started to get into some opportunistic type things in business where he wasn't being really honest. And I asked a good mentor, wonderful mentor of mine, what she thought of that. And she knows him as well. And I said, how does he come back from that? And she said, he probably needs to scrub public toilets for about 3 months. I went, oh my God, you know, the ultimate in humility. Yeah. And so what's happened in this modern life, we've sort of abandoned that pathway. And a lot of people don't value their moral code. They live a sort of financial survival existence or whatever. They're quite opportunistic and they'll do anything to cut a deal or those sorts of things. And they take on jobs because of the money, not because of the passion or the mission, those sorts of things. And so they get to a point in their life where they don't have that moral compass and they encounter people who do. And somewhere along the line, that makes them feel uncomfortable. And instead of stepping back and then doing the work and getting some guidance and finding a good teacher or a good mentor to help them, they then jump on board some popular cause. It could be the environment, it could be transgender rights, it could be Black Lives Matter, it could be the voice to Parliament, you know, whatever it is, they're just causes. And then start waving their arms around and pointing their fingers at people who don't agree and becoming highly moral. But that's not a moral code. That's virtue signaling. That's using some platform to try and tell yourself that you're a good moral person, tell everybody else you're a good moral person, but you're not. You're just an activist. You know? And it's not going to make you happy, you know, especially if your campaign isn't successful. But when you do the work to develop a moral code, and and I work with a lot of people on this, and I'm still working on mine. It's a never-ending journey. You get into a place where you feel more secure because you're more grounded in who you are, and your decisions are much more considered, and there's less likely to be any regret from the decisions you make, even if they're unpopular.
Yeah.
And so when you get to that place, your mind leaves you alone. It doesn't. But if you go against your moral code, man, you've just given your mind a sugar hit.
Yeah, I was going to say an example of
it's
this.
It's not going to leave you alone.
Yeah, an example of this would be like, coming back to workplaces again, or friends or whatever. If you are against bullying and you see someone bully someone else, and instead of sticking up for them and saying something about it, if you just stay quiet, you're going to go home and your mind is going to be racing and beating yourself up, right? It's like, I should have done something I didn't, and now I feel bad about it. So instead,
or it's going to be justifying. That's the other thing it does, and it's just going to be running justifications. My older brother's nephew is a jockey, and he rode Black Caviar through its career. And I never met the kid. I did meet him once, very, very briefly, but I don't know him. But he really impressed me at one point because they went to England to race at Royal Ascot in front of the Queen. And I don't know whether you remember the race, but Black Caviar went to the front and nearly got run down right at the end and just got across the line by a short half head, And of course, everyone thought, what's the jockey doing? How do you let that happen? And so they went into the press conference, and of course, the press, they were after blood.
Yeah.
They couldn't wait. And so the first question was directed straight at the jockey. What happened at the end? And he said, and he's a kid who grew up in Manangatang, so he's got a bit of a hayseed the way he talks. And he said, well, I made a mistake that an apprentice wouldn't make. He said, we went to the front as we normally do. And he said, I just let her cruise onto the finish, and the big motor stopped. And I duly shit myself and had to give her a jab, and we got across the line. He said, but ladies and gentlemen, that was a mistake that an apprentice wouldn't make.
Yeah.
No more questions.
Yeah, just diffuse
no more questions.
Love that.
I thought, wow. And your moral code is not just about making the right decisions, but it's also being really honest about your mistakes and then making amends for your mistakes.
Yeah.
And when you do that, your mind leaves you alone.
Yeah. And that comes back to, said it a few times on here, but, the best bosses I've ever had are the ones that have accepted that they made a mistake and just owned up to it almost straight away. And then everyone can move on. It's like, okay, cool. Wow. And now I'm going to do that, when I have people working underneath me and blah, blah, blah. So it's very powerful. It doesn't happen very often.
Well, it's a dose of humility. But, in the mid 1980s, when the share market became sort of famous, ego stepped into big business, big time, and dishonest ego, because it was all about money and making money and, feeding these savage, faceless shareholders that wanted, value. And so that really compromised everything across business. And we can look back at a train wreck of failures and, and crime and all those sorts of things. But, okay, I just call that a human experiment. We can bring that back on track, but the way to bring it back on track is for each of us to step up, and it's a pretty cool thing when you start to really land in that place and discover it and understand what it really means to have a good, strong moral compass and conduct your life from that place.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think most of my moral compass comes from my parents. So I guess it's one of those things where is it part inherited, part learned, or can you completely rebuild it?
Oh, you can start today, even if you've been the most dishonest person on the planet. You can rebuild it today, and it's going to take you time, though. You're not going to have it by next week. It's a journey, but boy, it's a beautiful journey. And there are there are ways. See, sometimes your mind is so dominant, it's hard to find your sense of who you are because your mind is so full of stuff and your attention's running everywhere, and and you're defending a lot of things and protecting a lot of things. But there is beautiful work. I mean, I think I really turned the corner. I mean, I was 45 before I started to really embrace having a moral code. Before that, if you said to me, you're an honest person, I would have said, of course I am. I'm never dishonest. That was my first lie to you, right?
What was, if you don't mind me asking, what was that sort of trigger at 45? Was it a self-awareness moment? Was it?
No, well, what happened was that I've always had this amazing curiosity for what lies beyond, and what are the mysteries of life, but where do you go to learn that sort of stuff? And I was invited into a meeting one day at one of the big workers' comp insurance companies. They wanted to start doing some wellness work. So this is 2005. And they wanted me to help them with it. And there was a woman in the meeting. She had this incredible presence about her, and she was really connected and available, and I couldn't get my attention off her. And I walked out and I said to the person that took me in, whatever she's got, I want it. What does she do? And I found out that she'd done work on a particular course stream, a learning stream. And so I went home and Googled it. It was a course called the Avatar course, AVATAR. And Avatar is a Sanskrit word, which has a similar meaning to the word bodhisattva in Buddhism. And so I went and looked at this website and I thought, I can't even figure out what that is, but it was a course. And I registered for it, and I went and did a course on the Gold Coast. It was a 9-day experiential program of exploring consciousness, using your own consciousness as your own unique case study.
Right.
And what a fascinating journey. And the moments of it were a little bit confronting, but not really. It's a very gentle process. And on the morning of the last day, I completely woke up. The separation between me and my mind was so clear. And that was the moment where I started to get a handle on what my moral compass was. Now, I loved the work so much, I wanted to share it with people. I went straight to the US to do the course to learn how to teach it. And then through teaching it and being in service, I started to have to integrate all those parts of me that were no longer useful to me.
Yeah.
So through service to others, we learn a lot about ourselves. And so that work is still around today. It's expanded. It's in the last 2 years, it's gone bunta in Iran. Like, just one man created this beautiful set of tools with no dogma or belief system attached to it, and it's in like 140 countries. And
wow.
And it's all online now, so it's very easy for people to do, and taught by beautiful, caring people. And so any of your listeners who have got a challenge with a really busy mind and they're struggling in that area, an Avatar course is a wonderful step to help them work their way through it, really get back in control and start to be more deliberate about their life. Yeah.
That's super interesting. I guess kind of the last question is, you've gone on this amazing journey, you've done so many different things. What would be the piece of advice you'd give to a younger you, knowing what you know now?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think, I would say, if I was saying myself when I was 17, I'd probably sit down with myself and say, Johnny, you think you know, but you don't. Now, find yourself 2 or 3 good mentors. Who are 2 or 3 people that you know that you really respect, who seem to have a handle on life, and reach out to them and organise to catch up with them, each of them once a month, and talk with them and be honest with them. Tell them what you've been doing, tell them what you're struggling with, tell them what you want to learn, and give them the space to give you guidance.
Wow.
That's probably the advice I would give myself.
That's pretty powerful.
Mm.
I love it. Awesome. Well, I guess Thanks so much for coming on. I guess, where can people find out more about you? I know you've got your website. Yeah, what's the best place to learn more about John?
Yeah, well, people can certainly come onto my website and have a look, or people are welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Yeah, I'm very easy to find, and yeah, just come and connect. And if anybody wants to have a chat, conversation, I've always got time. It's we say we're busy, but I've always got time. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, you gave time to me, so I'm really, really thankful for that. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on. And
all right. Thank you, Joel, and thanks for what you're doing. And I've got to say again, what you're doing with Foremind, I mean, the first time you showed me that, it blew my mind. It was like, I can just feel the amount of labor and the amount of love that's gone into developing that platform, and it's going to save a lot of lives. And the thing that perhaps you may not have contemplated, by the help that Foremind gives to adults, that's going to have a profound impact on the lives of thousands and thousands of thousands of kids.
yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. That's coming on to the whole theme about being kind. I think that's a lovely way to wrap up. So thanks.
Good on you, mate.
And thanks everyone for
Thank
listening.
you. Take care.